A single father millionaire watched the waitress helping his disabled daughter cross the street, and that moment changed her life forever. That seemingly ordinary instant sparked a chain of unexpected events, where a long-buried secret was unveiled, and a woman, once a stranger, proved to be the only one who could save the innocent child. My dear viewers, brace yourselves for a story that will leave you breathless, your heart racing, and glued to the screen. Take a moment to hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly connect with what I'm sharing here. And don't forget to comment below, letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is. There's nothing more exciting than seeing amazing viewers from around the world come together to experience a story like this. A single father millionaire watched the waitress feeding his disabled daughter, and that moment changed her life forever. That seemingly ordinary instant sparked a chain of unexpected events, where a long-buried secret was unveiled, and a woman once a stranger proved to be the only one who could save the innocent child. My dear viewers, brace yourselves for a story that will leave you breathless, your heart racing, and glued to the screen. Take a moment to hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly connect with what I'm sharing here. And don't forget to comment below, letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is. There's nothing more exciting than seeing amazing viewers from around the world come together to experience a story like this. Mason, a single-father millionaire, rarely took his daughter out. Since his wife's death, he'd withdrawn into a grueling work schedule and endless contracts. As CEO of Meditex, a leading pharmaceutical corporation, he could negotiate any deal, but faced with his blind daughter Ruby's untied shoes, he felt powerless. No report or investment strategy could teach him to be a father, let alone a father alone. Hope's Kitchen was an unassuming little diner. For Mason, it offered the peace he hoped would let Ruby feel like any other child. No flash bulbs, no prying stares, only the gentle clink of cutlery and a few patrons quietly eating breakfast. Ruby sat obediently at the table, tracing the ridges of her glass with her fingers. She could not see, but she sensed everything around her in her own way. Mason stepped away briefly for coffee. He assumed Ruby sat quietly as usual. Yet at the sound of a street musician's tune, distinctive enough to pique her curiosity, Ruby rose. She stepped off her chair. She stepped out of safety. When Mason returned, Ruby was gone. His heart seized, and then the screech of tires. A figure dashed from the doorway. A woman, her hair pinned high, her apron dusted white, threw herself forward. She yanked Ruby back from the path of the oncoming car. That moment, no dialogue, no screams, only a gaze. She knelt beside Ruby and whispered something soft, her voice a near whisper, yet carrying a tone that made one feel safe. An embrace that promised nothing, yet held firm. Her name was Lena. She offered no explanation for her swift reaction, and needed none. Mason watched from a distance, his heart both clenched and grateful. He raced forward, hands trembling, words caught in his throat. Ruby showed no fear. She merely tilted her head as though listening to the air, then suddenly beamed. Lena rose. Her apron was wrinkled, her dark shoes bore a smudge of sidewalk dirt, but that look in her eyes, it startled Mason. A profound gaze, as if she'd seen more than people should. No defense, no evasion, only stillness, direct and unguarded. He had seen that look before, not in diners, but in profit loss briefings, in the eyes of soldiers returned from war. Lena simply smiled, then turned back inside. No thanks, no desire for attention. Mason watched her go, feeling not just gratitude but something awakened within him, vague, delicate, yet impossible to ignore. Later, Ruby turned to Mason, her eyes still clouded, but her expression radiant. "She knows how to listen like I do." Mason's heart constricted. Ruby rarely opened up, rarely trusted. Yet in that moment, she had recognized Lena by her own way of perceiving the world, not by sight, but by heart. That morning concluded with Mason nodding at the counter as he bought a pastry to go, and seeing Lena wiping a table by the window. She did not look his way, yet seemed to know he was there. And he couldn't explain why he felt so reassured by a nameless background waitress who had grasped his daughter's hand at exactly the right moment. An ordinary morning with an extraordinary turning point. And it all began with a look, a helping hand, and a heart learning to open once more. Mason didn't often invite strangers for coffee, but that day he did, not out of politeness, but because a strange feeling was rising within him. He felt gratitude, of course, but more than that, he felt stirred. Lena sat across from him at the small corner table, her hands still dusted with flour. The faint scent of coffee lingered in the air. She spoke little. Her eyes were quiet, yet serene, neither evasive nor probing. Mason couldn't recall the last time a woman looked at him so directly, not for his title, not for his wealth. Ruby sat between them, slowly nibbling her donut. She was usually silent around strangers, but this time she tilted her head toward Lena and asked, in a soft yet clear voice, "Do you know how to read a book without words?" Lena paused, then laughed, a gentle smile like a warm blanket warding off the chill. "Perhaps with your ears," she replied softly. One question, one smile, and Mason felt something shift within him, like a long-locked door, now opening, not by a key, but by trust. The next morning, Mason returned to the diner, not for coffee, not for breakfast, but for Lena. He had no intention of lying. He walked in, glanced around, and saw her arranging pastries. He paused for a moment, then approached and invited her outside for a few minutes. No ceremony, no preamble. He asked if she could spend a few hours each week at his home, not to work, not to babysit, but simply to talk with Ruby. "She needs someone who isn't a doctor, isn't a teacher," he said, "someone who knows how to listen, not just with their ears." Lena was silent for a long time. Memories surged in her mind like a storm. Another afternoon, a locked room, a superior's voice, a mission gone wrong, a boy who never returned. She had once been an FBI agent, believing justice was the only guiding star. But one night, she misread a clue, and an innocent child paid the price. She resigned, left the city, left the flashing lights and lives commanded by orders. She came here, to Atlanta, to start over under her own name without badge or power, just Lena, the coffee server, the table clearer. She looked at Mason, this man with a fractured heart, his eyes wary, yet honest. She knew Ruby, a fragile sapling, easily broken. Lena understood what she was about to do. Unlock doors she'd long sealed. Yet she nodded. Not for Mason, not for herself, but for Ruby. The following week, Lena arrived at Mason's house, a large, eerily quiet home with bare walls and no laughter. Ruby guided Lena by hand through long corridors, touching each door and naming them as if they spoke. Lena listened, truly listened, with her whole presence. Each visit was a stitch on a tattered quilt. Ruby spoke through touch, Lena through memory. They read books with their fingers and drew each other with sound. And Mason, though seldom speaking, stood behind the door each time Lena left, silently listening to his daughter's laughter. One afternoon, as Lena departed, Ruby touched Mason's arm. "She's like Mom." He said nothing. He only bowed his head, holding back a sudden sting at the corner of his eye. Lena was not his wife. She would never replace her. But she brought something they had long lost, the sense that someone would stay, for them. And in that quiet, Lena began to feel something she'd forgotten. She deserved forgiveness. Not from the world, but from herself. A man who'd lost his way. A little girl who'd never seen the light. And a woman learning once more to trust. 3 souls. 3 wounds. And an invisible thread slowly binding them together. Not by blood, but by compassion. Mason's lakeside mansion by Lake Lanier sat silent. Beautiful, peaceful, yet cold. Like a memory someone refused to let time fade. The house had once echoed with laughter, music, footsteps racing down the halls. Now only silence remained, silence wrapped in gilded opulence, fine wood, and lifeless portraits hung just so. Lena arrived bearing no magic, only a gentle voice, simple music, and a heart once shattered. Yet that was enough. Ruby greeted her with a soft smile, something Mason had not seen in months. They read stories by sound, pressed piano keys to see with their ears. Ruby laughed, tilting her head to catch each note, as if her world had gained a new open window. Mason stood back. He was not ready to join them, yet could not walk away. He simply watched his daughter's laughter, saw Lena and Ruby side by side, their fingers tracing braille lines, softly whispering tales. For the first time since his wife's death, Mason felt his home come alive again. But that peace would not last. Lena began to notice oddities. One night, she woke to fetch water. Passing the staircase down to Mason's lab, she heard machines humming, not a refrigerator's hum or furnace crackle, but the steady pulse of technical equipment. A rhythmic sound like a beating heart resurrected. She paused by the wooden door. No knock, no call. Just stood and listened, then returned to bed without a word. Yet in her mind, a vague unease grew. The next morning, Ruby mentioned something that stopped Lena cold. While they read, Ruby whispered, "I heard someone, like Mom." Lena froze. "When?" she asked softly. Ruby tilted her head. "Last night, when I woke up, that voice downstairs. I know Mom's gone, but that voice sounded so much like hers." Lena relayed this to Mason. He went pale, face unmoved, but his eyes sank as if someone had slammed shut the window to his soul. He said nothing angry, nothing surprised, only closed his eyes for a moment and replied curtly, "Ruby's mother is gone." Yet Lena sensed something in that silence, something never spoken. Not sorrow, but fear. Not fear of loss, but fear of exposure. Fear of confronting a piece of memory Mason himself did not wish to recall. That night, Lena stayed awake. She opened her old laptop, the one she kept locked in her suitcase, and accessed her former agent files. She searched Mason's name. No criminal record, no investigations. But there was something else. Last year, Mason's company had faced allegations during an Italian clinical trial. Drugs suspected of causing severe neurological reactions. The incident was quickly buried, no major press coverage, and a few months later, Mason's wife died in a boating accident on the lake. No public autopsy report. Lena leaned back, her heart slowing but heavy. She didn't want to believe in coincidence, yet the pieces were quietly aligning. She glanced out the window. Light still glowed in the lab below. She knew Mason was there alone, doing something he did not want known. The next day, Mason said little, but Lena saw the change. He locked the lab door tight. His laptop never left his side. And when Lena entered Ruby's room, he followed, no questions, no interference, but present, as though afraid to lose yet another person. Lena did not interrogate. She did not pry. But deep inside, her old instincts awakened. Vigilance, analysis, suspicion, all returned as if never gone. Yet this time there was something different. She did not want to break this family. She wanted to understand. She wanted to protect. And above all, she refused to let Ruby be hurt ever again. A man bearing unhealed pain. A little girl seeing the world through sound. And a woman, burdened by her past, standing at the fragile boundary between truth and trust. Dear viewers, take a moment to relax or sip some water, then stay tuned for the surprising twists ahead. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always wonderful to see friends from around the world joining us. Comment 1. If you enjoyed this story, so we can continue bringing you more great tales. Lena never imagined she'd return. She had abandoned everything, buried every password, every access code, as if burying herself. But this time it wasn't for a mission. It wasn't for orders. It was for a little girl. For eyes that could not see yet, knew how to see through others. Lena sat before her screen, her fingers flying over the keyboard with the speed of a habit never lost. When the final line of code was entered, the security gateway opened. A report appeared, an old audio recording, a voice speaking in Italian. Lena went still. She had heard that voice before, not on any mission, but from the phone in Mason's house at 3 a.m. A woman's voice. Soft, with a southern Italian accent. But what made her shiver was how identical it sounded to Mason's late wife's voice. Another file opened, a case number once flagged by the FBI, related to an illicit drug trial. The research team's name had been scrubbed from official records, but internal notes remained. Led by a woman using a false identity, voice match at 93% with voice sample from Milan case. Lena stepped away from the screen. She stood before the window overlooking the lake. Her heart pounded, pulse by pulse. If that voice truly belonged to Mason's wife, what had really happened at Lake Lanier? And what was still occurring beyond Mason's control? At that moment, Ruby, in the characteristic silence of a blind child, was listening to the world in her own way. As father and daughter sat on the porch, Ruby quietly looked up. "Daddy, someone is on the other side of the lake." Mason frowned. "Are you sure?" Ruby nodded, then tilted her head as though listening for echoes off the water's surface. Heavy footsteps, deep breathing, not normal shoes. The engine stopped but wasn't turned off. I can still smell gasoline. Lena, standing nearby, froze. She hurried inside, opened her computer, and cross-referenced Ruby's description with old surveillance data. Walking pace, height around 6'1", weightlifting build, heavy breathing, accustomed to high-stress environments. She typed a name, Gavin Hartley. Then the file appeared. Mason's former associate in Milan, presumed missing along with the final trial data and over 12% undisclosed company shares. The same man whom, according to FBI notes, spoke last with Mason's wife before she was presumed lost. Lena sank into a chair, her spine chilled. not by Gavin's danger, but by the darker truth emerging. The woman Mason believed dead may never have lain at the lake's bottom at all. That night, Lena could not sleep. She rose silently, walked the hallway. Ruby slept soundly, arms clutching her braille book like a treasure. Lena placed her hand on the basement lab door, locked, but now she knew how to open it. An old habit, feeling the mechanical shifts, the tiny gaps in the lock. Once, twice, click. The door swung open. She entered. At first, nothing appeared amiss, but at the far end, a file cabinet was unusually locked down. Its surface bore fresh fingerprints, distinct. She did not open it. She merely stepped back, closed the door, leaving no trace. The next morning, Mason said nothing of her presence near the lab, but Lena knew he knew. Nothing escaped the gaze of a former CEO and a bereaved husband. Yet he asked nothing, as if they both understood something neither dared speak. When Lena joined Ruby on the porch, the little girl asked, "Did I hear wrong?" Lena squeezed her small hand. "No, you heard correctly." And in that moment, between silence and the truth rising to the surface, Lena knew. She was not merely investigating a case. She stood within a fractured family, a father too afraid to believe, a little girl waiting for her mother's return, and a past soul never laid to rest. Some secrets never die. They only wait to be named. Mason began to trust Lena, more than any therapist, any manager, even more than himself. He never voiced it, but her presence made every empty corner of the house seem less hollow. Ruby laughed more. Dinner had conversation. Old wounds, though unhealed, began to breathe more easily. Lena felt it too. She had never allowed herself to love again since that fateful day, a child left behind by one mistaken decision in the field. But Mason was unlike anyone she'd ever known. He was kind, vulnerably honest, and the way he looked at her held not a fragment of doubt. Yet, before she could embrace anything, Lena still carried a past she had never shed. One late evening, after Ruby slept, Mason invited Lena to dine on the back patio. Candles flickered, wine glowed in their glasses. He told her of the time his company nearly collapsed, of the countless nights he'd lain awake beside his wife's sickbed, never believing he could love again. Then, quietly, he took her hand. He said nothing more, just a gentle squeeze that made Lena's heart tremble. She did not withdraw her hand. But happiness sometimes lasts only a moment. The next morning, Mason received an unmarked package. Inside was a photograph. Ruby seated beneath a tree, smiling alongside Lena, taken from afar with a telephoto lens. What froze Mason's blood was the scrawled message on the back. "You will lose them both." Mason stood frozen, the photo clutched in his hand. His heart constricted, not from fear, but from something far worse. Doubt. He walked into the kitchen where Lena brewed tea. Without a word, he set the photo on the table. Lena saw it and went still. She knew what was coming. "Who are you, really?" Mason asked, his voice hoarse, not angry, but heavy with silent disappointment. Lena said nothing. She offered no denial, no excuse. She recognized that look, the gaze of someone betrayed to the core. She simply removed her apron, placed it on a chair, and walked out of the house without a word. Ruby whispered, "Miss Lena?" from her bedroom. But when she ran to the porch, the door was closed. That night, the house returned to its old silence. But for Ruby, everything had changed. She lay curled in bed, her ears straining to catch every sound, the wind's moan against the window. Then, as though guided by instinct, Ruby sat up, groped her way down the hall, and pressed her ear to her father's study door. A voice spoke. A woman's voice, soft, low, yet unmistakable. "No more hesitation, Mason. That child, if she remembers—" Ruby recoiled. Her small heart felt squeezed. She fumbled for her phone, dialed Lena's number, the one she'd secretly saved as Whispering Friend. When Lena answered, Ruby whispered, "Miss Lena, that woman's voice is in Daddy's study tonight." After hanging up, Ruby returned to bed in silence. But inside, she knew the only person she truly trusted wasn't her father. It was Lena. And Lena, who had driven away less than an hour before, was still parked 3 blocks away. She had intended not to return, but a child's whispered plea made her turn without hesitation. Not to prove anything, not to clear black from white, but to protect a child who had called her family. In the dense darkness of the laboratory, once Mason's greatest research hub, the monitor's glow flickered. Machines hissed as if guarding a weighty secret yet unrevealed. Lena stood silently behind the steel door, unarmed. She carried only her instincts and resolve. The woman was there. Not a ghost. Not a painful memory in Mason's heart. But flesh and blood, alive, breathing, and orchestrating a ruthless scheme. Her copper-brown hair fell past her shoulders. Her white dress clung to the proud form Mason had once adored. Yet her eyes, cold and hard as ice, were no longer the wife he had lost. She was a manipulator, a strategist. On her screen lay the entire plan. Shares stripped away, assets funneled overseas, illicit experiments run under Meditex's name for nearly 2 years. Lena entered. The strobe of overhead lights played across her face, recalling days she'd worn body armor, warrant in hand. But tonight, there were no commands, no FBI. Only a woman who had once backed away and now returned to protect a child. The other woman turned, unfazed, unafraid. Her lips curved in a knowing smirk. "Oh, you still can't resist playing hero, can you, Lena?" Lena said nothing. Her eyes flicked toward the room's corner, where Ruby huddled between 2 partitions. The girl made no sound, but Lena knew. Ruby was listening. To everything. "Does Mason know yet?" Lena asked, her voice as calm as water before a storm. "Not yet." The woman stepped closer, her smile like a blade. "And when he does, it'll be too late." At that moment, the back door slammed open. Mason stepped in. His gaze darted between the 2 women, then settled on the still glowing computer. And like a film fast-forwarding through his mind, he saw all the pieces snap into place. The sleepless nights, the falsified reports, the missing shares, the Italian voice in the night, the whispered words in the dark. Not a hallucination, not the product of grief. The woman he once loved had betrayed him. He said nothing. He simply stood in silence. For the first time, the woman's confidence wavered. She laughed, only to have her voice cut short by the distant wail of police sirens. Lena had sent her location and the evidence from her phone before she entered. This time, she did not need to prove she was right. The truth spoke for itself. Police burst in minutes later. The woman was handcuffed. She offered no resistance. only turned to Mason, whispering something unheard. Perhaps an apology. Perhaps a curse. No one cared anymore. Ruby was brought forward from her hiding place, shaking lightly, but still clutching Lena's hand. Mason rushed over, knelt, and held his daughter tight. For the first time, he wept, not from loss, but from reclaiming what he thought was lost forever. Outside, night had not yet surrendered to dawn. Yet inside each of them, something had just been cleansed. The next morning, the lakeside house by Lanier returned to its usual stillness. No hidden schemes remained, only gentle sunlight and the early song of birds. Ruby sat on the wooden steps, her ears listening to the world in her own way. She smiled, a smile as soft as a breath, but enough to brighten the entire porch. Lena sat beside her, her hand resting lightly on the girl's. No words spoken, yet the moment brimmed with connection. From inside, Mason stepped out. He looked at the two of them, one a woman who had once been a stranger, the other a daughter who had lived in darkness, and realized he was no longer alone. He sat down beside them and said softly, "I don't know how to be the right kind of father, but I know this. The one who makes my daughter smile is you." Lena said nothing. She only met his gaze and did not flee. For the first time in a very long while, she allowed herself to be trusted again. Three people, a father once broken, a woman once burdened by guilt, a little girl who had never seen the light, now sat together in the morning sun, none perfect, but all choosing to stay. Ruby whispered, "Miss Lena, I love hearing the birds sing with you. It sounds like light." Lena smiled. One need not eyes to see the light, only a heart brave enough to open. For family is not where we are born. It is where we choose to remain, after everything. Where are you watching this video, and what time is it for you? If this story moved you, please comment below. We'd love to hear. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this. And if you have loved ones or friends in the US, share this video with them. Perhaps it's the message they need today. Thank you for listening. Sometimes the smallest moments can change a life.